Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Adams. I'm an instructional designer and technologist at Chesapeake College, moderating this workshop with Dr. Paul Miller, who is the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at Montgomery College. If you go ahead and sign in to chat with your full name and institution, we'll be able to monitor the chat and try to get to your questions. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Paul.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom, and good afternoon, everybody. Happy Monday. I'm glad to be here with you today talking about the adopting a human-centered approach in a digital learning environment. So let me just go ahead and share my screen here. As many of you are aware, we're usually working with multiple screens. So I like to tell everybody, if you see me, I do like to be on camera, and you see that I'm looking off to the side, please know I'm actually looking at you. That's where you're actually located in my setup here. So again, welcome. I'm glad to be here. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, please go ahead. You can put them in the chat box. You can raise your hand. If I solicit answers, you can also come off mute. We're a relatively small group, and this kind of stuff is all about engagement. So the more you engage, the more hopefully you'll get out of the session today. So I really, again, welcome you to the session. And we'll explore today, hopefully, what it truly means to adopt a human-centered approach in digital learning. As you know, technology continues to evolve. And as it continues to evolve, we must continuously ask ourselves, are we designing systems or are we designing for people? Right? And in many cases, we need to do both, but we can't forget that the systems that we design are really for people. And people engage in systems in different ways than we obviously think in many cases. So human-centered design is about keeping the learner at the heart of every decision. And that means our courses, our platforms, our technologies all need to serve real people on the other side. So as we go through today, think about the things that you do, think about the things that you engage with, systems that you engage with, and we'll give hopefully some examples of how systems have been developed and maybe have gone wrong along the way and had to have been retrofitted in order to specifically meet the needs of the people that they serve. So we need to remember at the end of everything that we do that our work is grounded in empathy and inclusivity. And if we do that, we can really design digital learning experiences that don't just inform, but connect and inspire the people that we're hoping to engage in those areas. So the question I have for you to begin with is, what does human-centered learning look like for you? Or what do you think about when you think about human-centered learning? So if you could put that in the chat box, that would be great. So giving the learner the information in the ways they desire versus how I think it should be. Absolutely. It's a great response. Thank you, Jennifer. Let's get one or two more responses in the chat box. If not, an all-out refusal, awareness of AI in online courses. Absolutely. Right? Awareness of AI and how it can make a difference in an AI course is really, really key. So while you're finishing up here, let me transition to the next slide. So human-centered design begins with people, their needs, challenges, and their lived experiences, and uses those insights to help shape design decisions, right? So go into some of the things that you said in the chat box, especially the first one, giving learners information in the way that they desire versus how we think it should be, right? So what they desire really should give us insight into the way in which we design and create experiences for them. So instead of asking, what can this technology do? We should ask, what do learners need? Right? It's an iterative process that involves listening, testing, refining, and improving. Right? And we can do that through things like PDSA cycles, those plan, do, study, act cycles. Or we can engage students along the way within the course to ask for their feedback, right? In many cases, we wait till the evaluations to solicit student feedback, and then it's too late, right? Those decisions or those comments may inform future decisions, but the students who went through that initial experience may not get to benefit from what their feedback is. So in education, this approach ensures that our digital learning environments solve real problems and feel inclusive to all learners, right? We're really in a pivotal moment right now where we're talking about the changes to Title II of ADA. But I like to say this is inclusion by design, right? How can we use the things that we know in order to meet all learners' needs? So think for a moment. What's one digital course or training you've taken that felt designed for you rather than designed at you? And if you have an example, raise your hand or put it in the chat box. So again, what's one digital course or training you've taken that's felt designed for you rather than at you? So while you're typing, hopefully you have an example. One of the ways AI is so successful is because the way in which it engages with you really is about engagement with you, or it's a perceived engagement with you, not necessarily at you, right? It continues to mimic your behavior, and it continues to prompt or guide you as to what it thinks that you specifically need. So there's that personalized piece to AI that supports not necessarily a training, but an environment that seems like it's specifically for me. So design for me allowed me to multiple ways to obtain information. Not for me, but to do this ways. The only information isn't done by only one way, right? And you're exactly right, right? Any opportunity where you have agency, you have choice, and you have voice really does engage you in that human side of learning where it seems like it's designed for you, right? That's the nice thing about using something like Blackboard Ally, for example, that gives multiple ways in which information can be presented to students. Sometimes it may be sharing maybe different resources that learners can choose from. Absolutely. Again, that choice and that voice and that agency. I was in a course, a training course a few weeks ago that had a choice board. So one of the activities was actually an hour where I could just learn the information the way I wanted to learn the information using curated resources from the instructor. So think about that. The instructor is still determining what information is being presented, but it's given that agency over to me as the learner through that choice board to engage with it in the ways in which I felt more comfortable learning. So I was watching YouTube videos, for example, instead of reading information or instead of doing an online kind of interactive activity over the course content Excel. So every design process starts with two questions. What is to be achieved, and what do we want learners to know, do, or feel? And the other question is, how should the product look? How do we visually and functionally guide them towards the goal, right? And these questions remind us that we need to design learning outcomes that are intertwined. When we connect purpose and presentation, we create experiences that are meaningful, accessible, and engaging for the learners. So let's put this into a real situation. Right? I want you to just take a moment to look at this specific picture. So this is a user interface versus a user experience. And I'm sure just like you, just like me, I should say, you've seen this maybe around your campuses before, and you've seen examples, or maybe you've even taken the dirt path to get to point A to point B, right? Need another walked pavement. Absolutely. right? So the user experience or the UX is about what needs to be achieved. So as people are going transitioning across this specific part of campus, they need to get to from point A to point B quicker, right? The user interface is about how the product should look. So this is the path that the college is expecting you to take. However, sometimes the user experience and the user interface contradict each other in relation to what real needs are, right? So think about the user experience as the architect designing the flow of a house and the user interface as the interior designer choosing how it feels when you walk inside. In online learning, both of these things matter. Both the user experience and the user interface matter. If navigation is clunky or visuals are confusing, even the best content can lose its impact, right? And that's that visual appeal, right? The moment you log into a course and it feels intuitive, it feels warm, it feels engaging, it kind of intuitively allows you to navigate through the information, you know that that experience is going to be received better by the learner, right? So have you experienced this before? Like my backyard, and I love it. Have you experienced something similar to the picture on the screen? Have you ever taken the alternative pathway in an experience because it's just the easier thing to do? Have you ever questioned why not just build a path in this other direction? So let's revisit these two guiding questions again. What needs to be achieved and what should a product look like? Because that is really the things that should drive our attention to a human experience. So this just isn't a checklist or a mindset. Sorry, this isn't a checklist, it's a mindset, right? It's the way in which, again, we take ourselves out of that designing role to a user perspective so that we can center first on the learning outcomes of what needs to be achieved. And if we focus first on the learning outcomes, the second can really be about the experience. That's that kind of backwards design, right? If we want to get to Z, what do we need to do in
I was
between
gonna say
A
yes, so they're
and
probably
Y
just
in
reading
order
cross
to
talking about that.
specifically get to that part of the experience that we're trying to achieve? So when both align, we design our courses that are purposeful, intuitive, and human-centered. So take a quick moment, look what's on the screen. The user interface is about what to create, the interface that we create to, the tangible elements, the tools, and the interface itself and how that comes together. And then how we achieve it is that experience that's really designed to focus on process, right? Designed to focus on interactions. Again, in our LMS systems, what are those more intuitive courses versus those kind of bland courses that you experience where everything seems to be too regimented? Let's give you another anecdote here. So in professional design, the process begins with user experience, right? Designers research who are the users, what are their pain points, and what do they need. This leads to information architecture, the blueprint of how the experience should flow, right? Once that's ready, the user interface designers develop the look and feel, the interface, the colors, the buttons, and the navigation. In education, this is like designing that course wireframe. Again, what's the kind of framework in which we want the course to be designed to? It's decorating it with visuals and media and really pulling this together once we understand where we're going, how we're going to get there, and how we know we've arrived. So the user experience mindset ensures that our course structures make sense. Our user interface ensures that it's invitable and usable, right? So here is another example of user interface and user experience leading to different designs. So I'm sure you may have seen a Heinz ketchup bottle before, the old version, the glass bottle versus now the plastic squeegee bottle. In the glass bottle, sometimes it was really hard to get the ketchup, especially before, if you were the first user of the ketchup, to actually get the ketchup out of the bottle. But did you know there is a 57 imprinted on the glass that if you tap on the 57 while you're trying to get the ketchup out, the ketchup actually naturally flows out of the bottle? Well, in many cases, users didn't know that 57 played a specific role in design of the experience, right? So what tended to happen was frustration, or as what happened to me when I was a kid, I was in a Denny's restaurant on a road trip to Florida with my parents. And my mother shook a ketchup bottle that didn't have the lid on top, and the ketchup went everywhere, including over the people at the next table, because she was trying to get the ketchup loose to get out of the bottle. Fast forward to lots and lots of focus groups and lots of experiences, and the user interface is now completely designed with the user in mind. The squeegee bottle actually allows the ketchup to flow out of the ketchup bottle in an easier way. And again, it's that relationship between understanding function and process. So in a environment in which we serve, so face-to-face learning, blended learning, and an e-learning environment, the significance of human-centered design in digital learning is really, really key. It allows us to meet the diverse learners' needs of the students in which we serve, right? And again, we can do that through multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, learner agency, all of those things that we'll talk about here in a little bit more detail. But we can meet the diverse learner needs. We can enhance the user experience and engagement by building in specific areas or spaces for engagement to take place. And it really allows us in doing so to promote inclusivity within the digital space itself, right? As we transition from that face-to-face environment to an e-learning environment, some things that we typically hear are students feel like they're not connected or they don't have the same relationship with the course or with the instructor or with their peers that they do in a traditional face-to-face setting. So by design, we need to address all of the things that we know as students expect or want or desire in that e-learning experience. So as we move from this user experience and user interface, think about your own experiences as an online learner. What environments were more or were you easily able to attach yourself to or engage in, and why? What were some of those reasons? You know, what made certain classes feel more seamless, more engaging, more easy to navigate? And what things were not there when you experienced frustration? So go ahead and put that in the chat box for a second. So again, what made certain courses feel seamless, engaging, or easy to navigate, and what made others feel frustrating? And again, if you would like to talk, please just go ahead and unmute and you can tell us.
Hi, it's Amber. Can you hear me?
I can, yes, please go
I thought
ahead.
it's easier to just say this. I was
Absolutely.
going to say for me, from my master's degree, e-learning was the best because it worked best for me to fit it in when I could do my work around my other schedule with my family and working full time. So the e-learning worked really well for that.
Absolutely. So
Thank you.
methodology to start off with is a part of that personal preference, right? It was easier for you to do that, to do e-learning because of your everyday life, right? And in many cases, working professionals, those upskilling or increasing their degree attainments, find e-learning to be the biggest benefit, right? Within those specific courses, though, I'm sure you saw variability in the ones that you were able to engage with and learn more from, or ones that you just kind of checked the box to get through the experience to get the grade, right? So there was probably some variability in the courses that you took by design, right? Jennifer, you said easy, organization and instructor interaction. Great. Hard, unorganized, and lack of instructor interaction. Yep. So in a face-to-face classroom, one of the biggest predictors of student success is the student's relationship with the instructor and with their peers. So why would that be any different in an online space? Right? So that engagement between the instructor presence to show that somebody is on the other side of this course who cares about you, who wants you to be successful, is often needed to give motivation to our students. I was frustrated with a course that had all links and learning resources embedded in the syllabus. There were no modules, just individual pages linked from the syllabus. Absolutely, right? Think about that design, right? When we talk about engagement, engagement looks like different things, right? It doesn't necessarily always have to be engagement amongst peers. It's engagement with the materials themselves, right? So how can we create a holistic learning environment in the e-learning space that contains an experience for the students without maybe needing to engage with other people, right? I think that the engagement with other people is also important, but it's just one type of engagement that actually exists. It's the same thing as linking out to resources, right? Using not using things like the embed code when we put videos into our courses. By putting the link out to YouTube, it's disrupting the learning experience. It's changing the architecture. It's changing the environment, right? And if we do that, we lose the control that we have as the instructor within the learning environment, right? Because I don't know about you, but typically what happens is when I get to YouTube, the next video comes up and I'm like, oh, that looks interesting. And now all of a sudden I'm going down the YouTube rabbit hole and I'm not necessarily going back to the learning experience. So if I use things like embed code to keep that experience as a holistic ecosystem of learning, I can actually kind of monitor and engage and use data using the course analytics to see how people are engaging in that specific experience themselves. So all of these things, all of these feelings are a sign of good or poor design decisions in the experience itself, right? And we know that there is good online courses, there are mediocre online courses, and there are just bad online courses. And we want to create the good experiences the most for the students in which we serve. So how does UX and UI relate to online learning? When we think about design or user experience, we have to know who our audience are, right? We have to know or who will actually be engaging in the content, right? So one of the things I specifically do for my students is do the beginning of the year survey. And it's not just who are you? It's actually tell me about yourself. What do you like to do? And if I can weave that into the experience, I can do that using things like announcements, right? I can use video announcements. I can use those stories that they have, or I can use my stories to help create that human side of the online experience, right? I'll tell you a funny story about video. I love using video in my online courses. And I was on a train between Rome and Florence a few years ago, and I was between carriages giving video feedback that I was uploading through Flipgrid at the time to a student. And I was, again, in between carriages. I was given feedback and I accidentally fell down the stairs of the carriage while I was still recording, and simultaneously I hit the post button. So I posted back to the student video feedback where I fell down the stairs, and I thought this was really funny, right? And the best part of that is the students really get to see you. And I'm not saying that you need to fall downstairs to show that you're human to your students, but it really allowed students to see me in a different light, right? So in many cases, when I give video feedback, I use my stories. I usually wear t-shirts, I wear baseball caps because I want them to see me as a real person on the other side. I also use the wireframes to develop. I'm very big on learning sequences. So I like to take away the cognitive load from my students to condition them into that learning experience. And I like to use interaction in that design in order to make sure that their experience in the course isn't just static, right? So from an interface perspective, I can create iconography. So again, not only do I create the learning sequence, but I can use visual clues and I can use layout and I can use topography through all of the things that I do to allow them and to condition them into that learning experience, right? Again, I like to have a course that's visually appealing, but knowing that the visual appeal is very much by design, right? So I'm a big believer in the laws of simplicity, using simplistic design that actually has intent with my students so that I can condition them so that they're ready for learning, so that they can take on any of the learning that I'm bringing to their space. So how does user interface and user experience relate to online learning? Ease of navigation, right? Can students intuitively find what they need in the course? Content presentation, is material organized and visually clear? Interactivity, are students active participants or passive observers of information? And can I use the data or the analytics of the system to help understand how interactive things are perceived by my students? Accessibility, can everyone engage visually, audibly, and cognitively in that experience themselves? Again, one of the issues that we face in higher education is just the pure fact that a lot of students with disabilities do not disclose their disability to us. So therefore, we don't necessarily have to, or we should, but we don't necessarily design for accessibility in mind. We tend to take more of a reactive versus a proactive approach to accessibility. Motivation engagement. Does design inspire curiosity and persistence? Think about the things that just turn in from learning tasks to just tasks, right? One of my favorite things about discussion forums, for example, is, the post by this specific date and then respond to two of your colleagues by this specific date. That's not a discussion. That's not engagement. That's about compliance. That's about checking a box. So how can we get them to really understand that the motivation and the engagement around discussions really are about curiosity and persistence to engage with each other to understand the materials? Technical performance. Is the platform fast, responsive, and reliable? And if it's not, what are the roadblocks or the barriers that we can remove to let that experience be more positive for our students? Feedback and motivation. Do learners receive timely and actionable feedback? And what role does feedback build into continued motivation to continue with the other activities and assignments within the course? Support and communication. Are there clear ways to connect with instructors and peers? So when all of these elements align, digital learning feels effortless, and that's really the goal. And if you're familiar with Quality Matters, most of these things are in the standards for Quality Matters, right? In fact, they're all in the elements for Quality Matters. It's all about design. And it's all about transitioning from the instruction cycle where the instructor is at the center of the experience to a learning cycle where the learners are at the center of the experience. So this is a change in mind shift, transitioning ownership over to the learner. And that can be really hard for instructors to do. I know it was really hard for me to do, right? When I became an online instructor, transitioning that ownership over to my students, kind of allowing them this space in which they can co-create or craft the learning experience for themselves. So let's take a moment to reflect. When you last taught online, which of these areas felt strong and which could be improved? So take a look at the screen, take a look at the questions on the screen. Which areas do you think could be improved for yourself? Now, this kind of reflection, as you're reflecting on these questions, is truly the foundation of a human-centered design. It's how we identify the barriers and the opportunities for redesign. So are you comfortable with where the students are going, how are they going to get there, and how they've showed they've learned it? Or are you more comfortable with what am I going to learn? What do I know? What am I ready to learn? How am I going to learn it? And how will I share that I've learned it to my peers? So which side of the coin are you on? Which one are you more comfortable with right now? So you can just say instruction cycle, or learning cycle in the chat box, and then maybe I'll call on somebody to explain why their answer was their answer. So again, would anybody like to share which one are you more comfortable with? Are you more comfortable teaching through an instructional cycle or a learning cycle? For me personally, the learning cycle is actually much more easy, but my background is in collaborative and cooperative learning. That's where I spent a lot of my research. Carla, you said learning cycle. Would you mind coming off mute and saying why you said learning cycle?
Well, I teach educational technology. So I teach technology to pre-service teachers. And one of the things I tell them is it is better to be a guide on the side than a sage on the stage, and helping them walk through modules, helping them, guiding them, letting them do the learning and the discovery, and then me just helping them get there.
Absolutely. I love that, a guide on the side, sage on the stage kind of thing, right? And I was always told very early in my educational career, I became a classroom teacher in the K to 12 space in 2002. So almost 25 years ago now. And my supervising teacher said to me, "Do not go home more tired than the students at the end of the day." Right? So I learned very quickly that I needed to transition that ownership over to them. And Carla, just like you, that's now hopefully the message that my students get from me is they are the architects of learning, right? They're the ones who really need to own that experience.
I always wondered, when you have a 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old, they're just curious to learn. And by the time
Yeah.
they get into second or third grade, they're not as enthusiastic about learning anymore. It's because we don't let them discover. We tell
Yeah.
them everything, and then they have to regurgitate it instead of
Yeah.
letting them discover it still.
Absolutely. And when we think about that Bloom's taxonomy thing, right? The top of Bloom's taxonomy is typically what kindergarten, first grade, second grade students get to do the most, right? They get to create. And then as we get up into the K to 12 system and in higher education, it's a lot of recall, right? And we're kind of finding ourselves in that transitional period right now because generative AI is really putting a kink into that notion of recall because it recalls information very quickly, right? So how do we empower people to play, to construct knowledge? There really is a lot of movement right now into that notion of play and exploration. And that's why things like high impact practices and experiential learning are coming back into the pendulum swing of where we're at now currently in education. Now, as I said at the beginning, empathy is really the heartbeat of this whole human-centered approach, right? Traditional learning environments feel impersonal, or traditional online learning environments, I should say. One size fits all content, limited feedback, minimal interactions are typically the way online courses go until the online instructor kind of finds their foot in. So empathy again means seeing things through the learner's eyes, acknowledging barriers, emotions, and needs along the way. And I will say that from an e-learning perspective, we got a big boost in a positive way during the COVID pandemic. If something positive came out of the COVID pandemic was the sense that empathy was really something that came to the forefront, especially in the e-learning space, because most people were forced to go to e-learning throughout that experience or that crisis that we were facing. Lisa, as you said in the chat box, adults kill curiosity and don't want students to ask questions. Absolutely, right? When we talk about the what, the why, and the how of learning, we need educators to know that curiosity is the way to learn. Failure is a way to learn, right? In fact, we learn many things through failure, and failure isn't a bad thing. And the whole andragogy thing is really interesting. In fact, I just wrote a research journal on the connection between andragogy and UDL, with the question being, is UDL, which is a primarily K to 12 scene framework, something that now is more universally appropriate for all learners? And in many cases, is it andragogy 2.0? So I'm happy to share that with anybody who's interested. But without curiosity and questioning, we wouldn't have innovation. And Lisa, you're exactly right. So we know if we do these things, these are the right things to do to cultivate that learning experience for our students. So traditional digital learning often feels impersonal. Again, One size fits all is usually the way in which courses are typically developed, especially if people developing the courses, faculty developing the courses don't have an instructional design background or don't have necessarily a teaching background, right? Because a lot of instructional design is just good teaching practices. And in higher education, content expertise usually trumps the educational background, which is why we exist as instructional designers, right? So again, we need to get people to see things through the learner's eyes, acknowledging those barriers, those emotions, and those needs of the learners in which are engaging in the material. So, true story, a student once told me that they felt invisible in an asynchronous class, right? So I actually went to put in a weekly video check-in in my announcements, and I am a avid announcement user in my classes. And I went to video again. I went to video feedback for assignments, and the learner at the end of the course actually thanked me, and then took every single course that I taught within their program, which is always a great thing for me as an instructor. But it's kind of sad at the same time that other instructors are not employing those simple changes, right? So empathy isn't softness, it is a strategy, and it allows us to meet the needs of the learners without compromising the academic integrity of what we're trying to teach them. So we do need to look and teach and be aware of that lack of personal touch, the one-size-fits-all approach to content, and limited feedback and interactions. And we know these things on the screen. These are all things that we know online learning students face. Isolation, time-consuming resources. You know, how many times do you see faculty build courses with, 10, 15, 20 different journal articles in there for a week because they want to ensure that person is reading? Well, that's just causing too many barriers, right? I would rather have one journal article with a really great way to engage students in that learning process, because at the end of the day, it's about that engagement that gets to that deeper level of learning, which ultimately combats the motivation that we see here as one of the bigger pieces. So the human-centered design process is iterative. Research, prototype, test, and refine. I like to do that PDSA approach, that plan, do, study, act approach. In digital learning, that may mean gathering student feedback after a module, making small design adjustments to assignments, or seeing how engagement changes throughout the course. Again, I use data analytics to do a lot, to inform a lot of what's going on in my courses, and I do respond accordingly. So for example, I used to give my video announcements on Monday mornings at 8:30 in my courses. It was all set up. It was all set up, ready to go. And then I looked at the data usage of the courses, and I found that 90% of my students didn't actually engage in the modules until the first Thursday of the module, typically because that coincides with when the discussions were due. So I changed the announcement from going out on the Monday to on the Thursday. And I found that Thursdays around 4 o'clock was around the time that the data showed that students were first engaging with the system. And then the feedback I started to receive from my students was, wow, you really know when I'm online. You really know when I'm engaged in the content. So it was allowing me to build my instructor presence around what they were specifically doing in the class. So this isn't about perfection, it's about continuous improvement, right? Always looking at the lived experiences of the students and how I can mirror those specific pieces. So establishing a routine and a schedule is really, really key. Again, using research, using data to understand the preferences and the challenges of the learners in the course. Using those things like the welcome surveys, get to know you kind of surveys. Using that iterative design, again, that learner sequence. I'm really big. My favorite one is bring it back, bring it on, work it out, get it done, bring it up next. That 5-step approach to show that what you learn in this module is something that's going to connect to the next module, because you're actually going to bring something to that module, whether it's an artifact or learning that you're going to need in order to have that prerequisite or jump off to the new things that I'm going to introduce you into that specific piece. Establishing that all learners, regardless of their disabilities, can access and benefit the resources, right? That's a part of that schedule. The collaboration tools, integrating tools that allow for that peer interaction and community building, and using those in a routine way, right? But in a routine way that doesn't necessarily lead to just task formation. Again, I actually asked students to respond to as many responses as they need, but I want them to engage in a way that looks like a discussion. So you don't have to respond to two of your peers just to check a box. I want you to find somebody who you're going to engage in a conversation with. I will say it was a sad day for me when Flipgrid disappeared, but I've been able to create a similar experience to Flipgrid using Microsoft Teams. So it is kind of a convoluted way. Flipgrid was so much cleaner and much easier. But if you're interested in how I have recreated some of that experience, you can always reach out to me, and I'm happy to share that that way with you. It's a mini system. Again, it's kind of a band-aided approach, but yeah, it was a sad day when they got rid of Flipgrid. So the second one is utilizing those online tools for personalization, for flexibility, for that interaction, but most importantly, if it has a built-in feature that allows for feedback in real time, to actually use that to build that motivation for our students, right? If we do that, then we create those opportunities for interaction. Creating those opportunities for interaction are really, really key. Again, it allows the students to engage with the instructor, which is a huge predictor of student success. It also allows us to create opportunities for interaction with peers. Now, we have to be careful with this because online learning, I believe it was Ann's point earlier, sometimes we fit online learning around our busy lifestyles, and that is one of the benefits of online learning. So if we have the wrong kind of interaction or the wrong kind of opportunities for collaboration that also don't take that into account, we can actually create more barriers for our students. And at the end of the day, if we can do all of these things effectively, we can increase the motivation, because that is ultimately what we need to tap into so that our online learners can be successful in those learning environments. So human-centered design approaches for online learning, you know most of these. Empathy, we've talked about, helping students gain a deeper understanding of people's needs, problems, and desires and values is really key. That's kind of on us to do, right? There's no magic understanding for that. It's how we perceive ourselves in the process. I can tell you that usually empathy is much stronger if you've been an online student and you've seen and you've felt what being an online student can be when you don't get that feedback right away from your instructor, or if that assignment that you've been assigned to in a collaborative way, if nobody's really collaborating with you to do the assignment, right? So again, structure design allows us to combat those things in real time. Establishing an online community of inquiry, right? This really is that framework that allows for the discussions on the course design around the modules to have those consistent structures, right? The community of inquiry is known. It's enabling you to find your place and your rhythm within that learning experience. It allows us to have a defined role of collaboration using things like the discussion or reflective activities or weekly summaries to show how that community actually exists in itself. And if we can develop that community, we can really get much more engagement, authentic engagement that leads to the problem solving, right? If we can create an environment that built from community engages students in problem solving through real world situations, we can really get them to sink their teeth into those learning experiences. That's that whole high impact learning practices or high impact practices and experiential learning activities where students can brainstorm, they can connect, they can prototype, and they can share their solutions with each other, right? So if we can get students to be a part of designing the solutions for specific learner groups, they can actually engage more and they can go through that process between understanding information and transitioning that from short to long-term memory. And that's where universal design for learning comes into place, right? If we can tap into the tenets of universal design for learning, we can transition that ownership not only to the students, but from the student's short to long-term memory by understanding or addressing the what, the whys, and the hows of the learning experience, right? So we can tap into the engagement, those multiple means of engagement that allow for purposeful interactions among students to simulate interest that builds that motivation to the learning experience itself. Representation, given more authentic tasks of our students, right? Addressing that what of the learning process, where students can actually present information in different ways and show how they're creating solutions to specific problems. So going back to the chat where you had mentioned creativity, give an opportunity for students to demonstrate different ways in a creative way, their understanding is really, really key. And then for the how of learning, the action and expression, right? Finding ways in which students can express what they know in ways in which they know it, right? So if we can provide different viewpoints through that representation, they can demonstrate their understanding in some of the same ways, right? If the representation of knowledge is being shown through video or through choice boards or through journals or through posters or through infographics, students can use those models to demonstrate their information and understanding back to us. And the great thing about generative AI is generative AI can give us tools in which students can prompt their knowledge into some of those more creative demonstrations of understanding. So we have a few minutes left. I wanted to throw out some questions to the group. Here are the questions on the screen. But the question I want to end with today, with the last few minutes we have, is the very last question. After learning about human-centered approaches today, what are your initial thoughts or reservations about its application in your teaching environments? So I'll give you guys a second to just scan these questions real quick, and then I'll stop sharing my screen and open it up to a discussion amongst the group before we wrap up for the session. Okay, so let me stop sharing my screen. The floor is yours. So from the questions that were posed on the screen down to the questions at the end, what are you going to do with this information? What's something that intrigued you? What's something that you connected with? Why is it important to do this as developers in this e-learning or online learning space? So what's your thoughts? And again, if you would like to come off mute, that would be great. Or I could always go to the chat box to find people who have put information in there. And I think you came off mute, or
I
Emily, you came off
did. I'll
mute
say
too.
something.
Go
Maybe
ahead.
if I get brave, everybody else will get brave. I am non-teaching faculty. I'm a librarian, but this was an interesting presentation and just gave me more food for thought about the importance of making things accessible, no matter somebody's learning style or any of their physical things that are happening, and to always think of that. I think that's a big piece of designing things to make it as accessible as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
that, Anne. Yeah,
Hmm.
and just so that if you're interested, we do have a Universal Design Center here. And one of the things that we've created to help support that is this framework called the CLEAR framework. So if you go to the MC Universal Design Center website, click on digital accessibility, there are guides to help operationalize a lot of this information around accessibility, digital accessibility, in a way that is very staff and faculty friendly. So I definitely invite you to those materials.
I just wanted to say that I decided, since this is my first time teaching an asynchronous online course, that it felt very impersonal to me. So every week I do that announcement where it's a video of me going like, hey guys, like, here's where I am with grading your papers. Here's what to expect this week. Like, if you want to work ahead, here's like what the span of the next couple of weeks looks like. Go through all the modules and show them where I've added some extra resources and things. And at first, I didn't think any of them were watching it because I got no feedback or comments. So in about my fifth one, I said, hey, if any of you are actually watching this, just like, send me a note or whatever that says this is useful. Otherwise, I'm not going to keep doing this. And the number of responses that I got was that this is super helpful. Please keep doing it. Like, I really appreciate your videos was kind of touching. So it's definitely a way to add some personality to your classes.
Absolutely. And I will say I teach at a different institution than here at MC. I run the Center for Teaching and Learning here. But I've worked with multiple LMS systems, and that's the one feature I really like about Canvas is the replies. It's really nice to engage students through those replies, whether it be to announcements or, Emily, just to get that post check, right? And one of the things that I've done now with my video announcements and my written announcements, because I go backwards and forwards, is I specifically name students. And it's so great to see them like give it the thumbs up or react to hearing their name in those announcements. But don't underestimate the effort that you put in to create those communities. If you find your DFW rates reduced, it's because of your presence. It's because of the things that you're doing in those courses. So what you do does make a difference. And the nice thing about online learning is we have to create everything up front. Like everything should be created for our students by design from the get-go. So we do have kind of that development time along the way to try things to build those relationships with the students. One of the things from a humanistic side that I did a long time ago, and I still do to this day, is I give my students a golden ticket. So in any module, they get one a semester. And if life just kind of gets in the way, they get to use their golden ticket for any of the module activities, and they get full credit. It's kind of like it's just a golden ticket for them. And at the end of the semester, I only usually get 2 or 3 students who actually take advantage of the golden ticket. But at the end of the semester, the feedback I get about just knowing that they have that relief if they need it has been so incredibly positive. So I definitely, Emily, as you're kind of navigating the space, try the golden ticket too. That really works with students. And I did put the link to the clear framework and the guides in the chat box. Please know that they're all open. You can reuse, you can duplicate them, you can use them for your own needs. So if there are no other questions, thank you for being with me today. Thank you for talking through the topic with me. I know some people were interested in some of the things that I had offered. So if you're interested in the andragogy article with UDL, or you're interested in how I did the Flipgrid thing, please just reach out to me. It's just my first name, period, last name at montgomerycollege.edu, and I'll be happy to connect with you and talk through things with you at a time that works for the both of us. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the week and happy forwards. It's beautiful outside, or at least where I'm at, it's beautiful outside.
And Tom, can you put the end slide up? For those of you, if you're waiting for this slide to click on the end for the end.
And I put my email address in the chat box too.